like to call this December 16th, 2020 Special Board of Education meeting to order. Mr. Anagnostou, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Bissell?
Here.
Mrs. Salee?
Here.
Mr. Micko?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mrs. Hausum?
Here.
All are present. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on our agenda is public comment. I have one slip. Gianna Manzo.
Hello, everybody. Is this on? Okay. I just want to say that, thank you for everything you guys are doing. Again, as always, virtual learning is actually going pretty well. It's very structured. My daughter's finally getting the hang of it and what to do. So it's actually been better than I expected once you get a new outlook on it and everything. I'm still a big advocate for in-person learning, of course. I think that's personally the best for my daughter and for many others. So I just urge you guys, hopefully, that we can get back to that. I know there's been staffing issues and things like that. But I just want to mention, I just recently saw that the leading cause of death, ages 10 to 14, is now suicide. Just jumped to number 1. So it's been a very, very big issue. Obviously, I think you guys are aware of that. I work at Fairview, and we're seeing our ped psych unit being full always with suicide ideation, depression, and all that. So it's definitely been a huge increase. I also wanted to say Dr. Fauci, who I think you guys know is the leading infectious disease expert handling COVID, he's commented that he thinks kids should stay in school as well as long as safety measures are in place. So I think that speaks a lot for, the leading guy for this is saying that kids should stay in school with these measures. So yeah, I just want to say I'm happy overall with how you guys are handling everything, and hopefully the staffing issues can resolve. I did have a question, if I'm allowed to ask.
Sure.
Doctor, I don't know who can answer it, but so I know that substitute teaching, you need a bachelor's degree. I think I messaged Dr. Ryba about it. I was just wondering if that's like a state law or something, if you guys are allowed to bend rules and allow just associate degree people to substitute, or if it is like a state law. I was just wondering, given the circumstances, I'm sure many would offer to sub who don't have bachelors, who could pass background checks, whatever. I didn't know if that was a thing.
Yeah, Ms. Palco oversees our human resources. So Jenny, you want to answer that question?
Yes, you do need to have a bachelor's degree to be able to sub, and then we can get you a sub license. So that is necessary.
So it is necessary. Okay, I just didn't know. Okay, and that's all I have to say.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas. I do not have any other slips, and I don't see anyone else. So that is public comment. Next is board discussion, responsible restart. Dr. Ryba, did you want to get us going?
Sure. Well, as was just shared, we've been in remote learning 2.0 for the past couple weeks, and we're coming up. We set that decision in motion through Thanksgiving, through the winter break. As I shared with those that I've talked to, it was a good decision when the decision was made. It was a great decision once we got past Thanksgiving. We did see a spike in COVID positive cases and COVID related absences that would have made it extremely difficult to continue to staff our buildings. In the interim, Jenny's been working continuously to continue to bolster our sub pool. The challenge that we're having with substitutes, and just stealing what Jenny shared earlier today, is there are so many long-term leaves that people are on. It's not just day to day. That in our district, other districts, teachers are taking, I have to take a leave, whether it's FFCRA or FMLA. So all of our day-to-day subs are getting full year jobs. And then the day-to-day sub pool is less. But Jenny's been reaching out, to local colleges to help with December graduates to get them on the books. But we feel like we're in a better spot for staffing as we move forward. And we go from there. One of the things that we've got to decide is what is our learning framework for after winter break. The decision that we made got us through winter break, but we need to have a discussion about what we do after winter break. And so that's why we are here tonight, to start that discussion. And Mr. Micko, if you'd like me to continue, if you want to kind of talk with the board as to the pathway to making those decisions, I leave it to you.
So if you would continue, because we do have your recommendation, so I
Yeah.
think we should start there.
Okay.
And then we can discuss based off of that.
So what I'm sharing with the board and what my recommendation moving forward as we take a look at this is taking a look at everything holistically. We know that if we are in purple, that we are in remote learning. So as I give my recommendation, we need to put it under the umbrella of if we move to purple, that's a different recommendation. We stay in remote learning 2.0. But if we are not in purple, here is what I am recommending to the board. I am recommending that the week of January 4th, the first week that we're back, that we continue in remote learning 2.0 for that week. The reason that I suggest that and recommend that is by looking at our local data. By looking at, we took a look, and I asked Jenny to track for us, what were the COVID positive cases that we had 2 weeks prior to Thanksgiving? And what were the COVID positive cases we had 2 weeks after Thanksgiving? We saw a large spike in our COVID positive cases the first week after Thanksgiving. We saw a 175% increase in new COVID positive cases and a 90% increase in COVID-related absences. I have symptoms, I've been quarantined, whatever that may be. But what we saw is that in week 2 after that, we went back to, I gotta get a different mask, this one keeps moving on me. Andy, can you do me a favor? On my desk, there's another mask there. Can you grab that and bring that for me, please? Huh? No, it is freshly laundered. Thank you. So what we saw in the second week, that first full week, what was it, December 7th that week, we saw new COVID cases go back to our normal levels. And so the other thing that we took into consideration is that what we've seen with our staff cases, we have Jenny's the COVID coordinator for adults. We have our district nurse that's for students. Once they are exposed or in that process, that it's typically 7 to 8 days before they develop symptoms. So when we take it, and I've shared in my email updates to families that the Ohio Department of Health, the CDC, are all recommending that a quarantine period could be 10 days. So part of my rationale and recommendation is we understand that people are probably going to get together. We can't control that, right? People may make the choice to get together as families over the break. There's an increased chance of people being exposed to COVID. If we take a look at, okay, January 1st is the last day that there's traditional holiday gatherings, if we wait until January 11th, that gets us to almost 10 days of time before we bring all of the kids and staff back. And so that is one of the things that is the reasons why I've taken that into consideration. Thank you for the very sanitary brown paper towel. All right. Much better. Thank you, Andy. So that's what got me to the recommendation for January 4th. What I don't want to do is I do not want to open back up schools for in-person learning and then have to close them down a week later. And so I think if we wait that week, we'll be able to determine people that were exposed to COVID over the winter break should predominantly show their symptoms. We'll reduce the possibility of spread within our district as we move forward. So it's kind of one of those things, let's go slow to go fast. Mm-hmm. Let's be cautious to have a sustainable framework. So, one of the things I've done in the last couple of weeks is I've talked to our administrative team, I've talked to a lot of our staff, I have 2 staff focus groups that I work with, and talked to them, and the themes that came out of those, they say it different ways and they make different requests, but what I heard in all of those themes is we're concerned about the spike after winter break, and we're concerned about consistency for our kids and for our adults. So that leads to why I think January 4th should be a remote learning week for when we get back from winter break. Moving forward from that, I believe on Monday, my recommendation on Monday, January 11th, is that we move back to the learning framework we were in prior to going to remote for the Thanksgiving time period. So that would be pre-K to 5 would be in person, and grades 6 to 12 would be blended. And so on Monday, January 11th, we would move to that framework for, as I've described. And then my recommendation is to give stability, to move away from week-to-week decisions, that we would say we are going to be in this learning framework until further notice. And what until further notice means to me is until we see a major shift to the negative, which means we have to be more restrictive, or we see a shift to the positive, which means in grades 6 to 12 we can bring kids all in. And so what I think that provides is that provides a consistent platform, a consistent learning framework. Our families know what to expect, our students know what to expect, our staff knows what to expect, and then we can move forward in the learning framework in that manner. In terms of 6 to 12, so if you take a look at, pre-K to 5, I'm saying on January 11th, we're in person 5 days a week. For 6 to 12, in terms of blended, what I am recommending is that there's 2 avenues to go forward with this, and I leave that to the board discussion. One avenue is to say we want to see, what I recommended there was a 4-week decline in our metrics that we use, our key metrics to look at prevalence, spread, absences, substitute rates, risk factors that we analyze that, we want to see a decline over a 4-week period before we would move from blended to in-person. We have already, we're just to give you a time frame, we're in week 1 of decline. So if you look at a lot of our metrics, this is a week that we would consider the first week of decline that we've seen in those metrics. The other way that you can take a look at this is if you want to say and set a benchmark of a definitive date, you could say that grades 6 to 12 will be remote for January 4th, blended starting January 11th, and by this date, we are going to move to in-person 5 days a week unless something happens that would cause us to stay in blended. So that's another way that I think are both 2 pathways that I would support moving forward with. Because in either of those pathways, you're using our data, you're using the metrics that we're using to take a look and to see if there's risk factors that we should pause on moving to that all-in model. The last thing in my recommendation is, okay, how do we provide stability if there's flare-ups or if there's, a building that has a higher prevalence of cases? And what I'm recommending is that we move away from we move away from transitioning the entire district from a learning framework to remote 2.0, but we look at strategically doing that based on the building need. So what I mean by that is once we implement this fully, I would be recommending that we look at the middle school and high school differently. We don't say, okay, middle school and high school, you both have to go back to blended now, or you both have to go back to remote. We would say, we're seeing a heightened number of cases or student attendance issues or staff substitute issues. So high school, we're going to move you back to blended, but middle school, you can stay all in. Or middle school, we're going to move you to remote 2.0. High school, you're going to stay in blended. So I think we need to be more strategic in our decision making. And so what this looks like in practice is that at the preschool and elementary level, preschool is its own unique entity in terms of how it's structured. And we socially distance more there than any other building, so I think we'll be okay. But at the elementary level, we move cohorts. The only intermixing we have, besides limited times on the entry and exit and buses, is by grade level. So what I would look at is to say, okay, we've had some concerns with COVID cases or quarantines in these grade levels that I'm recommending that I make the decision to say these grade levels would go to remote 2.0 for this period of time. It would allow us to use substitutes across the district to keep other buildings going. It would allow those quarantines and those cases to be all in the same structure, get a high quality education in a remote setting and get them back in a shorter period of time. And I wouldn't have to impact an entire building for a 5th grade issue or a 2nd grade concern. At the middle school, we've started to have initial discussions as to how can this work at the middle school, because when you look at the elementary and its grade level intermixing of cohorts, you look at you look at the elementary, it's grade level intermixing of cohorts. If you look at the middle school, it's grade level, but you've got more movement, right? It's more movement than the middle school. In talking with the administration there today, we feel that there's some possibilities to do grade level or team-based movements to remote 2.0, but I am going to need a little more time to discuss and see what's feasible and possible there. At the high school, they are moving and intermixing all the time. So if we see spikes at the high school and we don't feel blended is going to be the solution, the high school is the one building that the whole building would have to go into remote 2.0. We couldn't do it by grade level or department. It just wouldn't work at that level. So we could be very strategic at the elementary level, somewhat strategic at the middle school, and it's a building-wide decision at the high school. But that is my recommendation for how we address the projected winter spike after the winter holidays and stability in the learning framework.
An immediate question, feedback at the high school, the middle school, and at the elementaries on how they, the hybrid or the blended teaching model. One of the challenges I think we have is that at any of the levels, when we do have the quarantines, having tools to be able to effectively allow the students to be isolated or quarantined, but also change from you have 2 weeks and it's going to be tough and we'll send home as much homework packets as we can to you're going to be quarantined at home, but your classes will be live streamed. Are we at a point now where we think we can be successful with that kind of scenario?
So yeah, at the secondary level, I think we've made great strides before the Thanksgiving break to move towards that. What we've shared before and has been shared, you know, some classes don't transfer as well to live streaming, so they have alternative methods to get there. But the idea, are we set up for, you know, quarantines for students to continue on? As we take a look at the marriage between, you know, in-person instruction and SES Connects at the secondary level, that's what we have the system built for it. It's just going to take time to become fluid with it. So in talking with our teachers this week, you know, some of the feedback that we received is, you know, how do I engage and support students, you know, in a virtual and a live environment in the same class? So it's not perfect, right? So the benefit is, are we ready for students to be at home in a quarantine or be at home in an SES Connects and have access to live instruction? Yes. How do we develop that and evolve it beyond a passive observer at home to an engaged participant in a classroom, no matter where you're seated? That's a process of growth, and we're going through that clunky stage of trying to figure out how that works in practice with our teachers. And you know, when you take a look at the curriculum or the course guide that we have and the number of classes we have and the nuances to all of those classes, some it transfers more easily to than others. You know, I know you know, Dave shared an update with me earlier today. So one of the things in these concurrent classrooms, aren't you proud of me, Dave? So concurrent means we've got both live and virtual going on at the same time. That we're having is when we do breakouts and our students are working in groups, they may be working in groups with virtual students at home, that they're having trouble hearing. And it gets muddled with all of the noise. So Dave's department has bought earbuds with a microphone for all of our students so that we can address that issue. So we're chipping away at some of these things to make it work. And that's one of the things our teachers are starting to learn from practice is, how do I engage my students at home? Well, I use my students that are in the classroom to help with that. It doesn't have to be all on my shoulders. So instead of having, you know, the Google Meet just pointed at the screen, I have the Google Meet pointed at a couple kids, and we can engage that way. And we can, you know, so those are things that they're trying, they're you know, experimenting with. And I think, you know, what we want to give our teachers a sense of safety and comfort that they could try these things, they can figure out what works, what doesn't. They're going to fail as they go through this and try different things, but that's okay. We're failing forward and learning from that, and that's how we're going to get better for it. And our parents have been, as far as I've had communications, have been great and patient and understanding that it's a learning process.
And again, the reason, I mean, I know Seth's asked, I know we've all asked, but I think it's important that we have those tools. We should announce, or we should at least recognize that, you know, the larger world, we have had good news in the last couple of weeks. We have a vaccine, we have a number of vaccines, they're coming on board. We can see the beginning of the end. We can see the beginning of light at the end of the tunnel. But we do need to be able to effectively get from December 2020 to July, August 2021, whatever that time frame is. And I think being able to deal with the quarantines in a better way than we've had before is critical and important to me. Did anyone else have any follow-up questions?
I do. You spoke to the, like, progressive effectiveness at the high school, but where are we with that at the elementary level?
So at the elementary, you're talking about supporting students in quarantine or isolation. So our elementary principals met today. They have finalized their recommendation for how to support students that are in quarantine and isolation. So I would just ask at this time, I don't want to share publicly with what they haven't had a chance to talk with the masses about, but they have a plan. It's a plan that really, for the majority of our teachers that have supported students in quarantine, it's going to be very similar to what they've been doing, but it's systemic across the district. So I will share that with our community and with the board as we're able to filter that out, since they just finalized that this afternoon. But you'll be happy with the plan. I am sure. I'm sure.
Cameron, you talked about the trying to kind of isolate a little bit more the need to quarantine or go remote with certain groups. At the elementary level, instead of going by grade, are we even able to drill down more to potential classrooms instead of having to affect the entire grade level?
Yeah, and I think those are the game-based decisions we're going to have to look at. We're going to have to take a look at, even though we keep cohorts of students together, if, and this I rely on Jenny and Crystal and the principals to take a look at this to see, it's that balance. We had the conversation earlier today. It's that balance between, do we take a cautious approach where we guarantee kind of the safety of a group that could be exposed versus, what happens if we say we're just going to do this class and a week later it's spread to that class. And so those are the things that I think we have to balance in the decision-making of, what's in the best interest of the class, what's in the best interest of the grade level when we make those decisions. So those are some of the things that we'll take a look at based on, we've got a lot of data now, right? We've got a lot of experience with how this works in the schools. And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to how it moves, but sometimes there is. So I would want to look at that and at first maybe take a more cautious approach. And then what we've learned through this is, and the CDC and ODH has updated their guidance, maybe we'll learn that, okay, if it's concentrated in this fifth grade classroom, we don't need to do that because we now have evidence to say, at least in these instances, it really didn't move beyond that classroom.
Another question I had is regards to, you talked about the decline of the data or of absences of for teachers, for students, and all those other metrics there.
Yeah.
You said this is week 1. Well, being off for 2 weeks, obviously, does that then reset? Or we come to January 7th, that would be potentially, week 3, I guess, at that point? Or does it kind of restart once the school calendar kind of kicks back in? See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. So the way I look at it is a lot of the metrics that we are looking at, people still contact Jenny. Her Thanksgiving break was filled with, contact tracing and COVID cases. And so what we'll have to do is take a look at as to whether we will, based on the amount of communication we get and information, whether we pause and just say, at the end of this. So depending on what this week is, this end of this week could be week 2 of the decline. And then January 4th, that week could be possibly week 3 of the decline, if that makes sense, because the 2 weeks of winter break, we're not going to have,
That was my
staff
point, yeah.
absences, student absences, the communication in terms of COVID positive cases may slow down a little bit simply because there's a time period lapse. So we'll just have to see, but that's my inclination right now that, hopefully things continue to move in the right direction. December 18th will be week 2 of the decline. January 4th, we'll pick that back up.
Okay, that makes sense, because naturally those 2 weeks are going to be declined no matter what,
Right,
so.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Parents, like, this is our last, well, I don't know, right now, I guess my question is, when would you make a change back if the numbers start to go up? Like, cause, parents would like to have more than a week to know
Yeah.
what learning model we're in. So if we're saying today, we're gonna go, learn remote that first week and, your recommendations for that second week based on grade level, what week would you be looking at changing that? Like, I don't know, right now we're declining, but the last week in December or that first week back in school in January, have you thought about that?
So in terms of, what kind of notice, our guideline has always been, and we talked about this, that it's our intent to give at least a week notice. If it's something that's immediate, it'll be shorter than that, but our intent would be to at least give a week's notice. And based on, kind of how we're looking at the data, you start to see trends increase. So I feel pretty comfortable that we would be able to say at least, hey, this building, this grade level, you're kind of on the watch list. We're concerned with the way things are going, and start to give some indication as to where things are at. But I think at least, this is just me talking from my own personal opinion, I think the idea of global consistency, here is the framework we're going to operate in until further notice. There may be small adjustments. We're not talking about 4 weeks of being in remote learning. We're talking about small adjustments. I'm hopeful and I personally believe that people will be understanding and supportive of those small adjustments for the greater good of keeping stability in the learning framework. But those are things, Sherry, that I would take a look at, is just to start to say, and I can't remember if I said this to the parents. I know I said it to the staff, here's 2 buildings that we're concerned about attendance with. We're getting close to that 20% mark. So we're going to keep an eye on those as we move forward. But that would be my thought process as to how we would handle that.
You talk about the decrease part of it. Would you also take a look at it from a 4-week standpoint of increase to make any recommendations of change?
Yeah, and so in either of these, I didn't say in terms of the increase to make a change, but I think you're looking at trend data to say, in my recommendation, it works both ways. We're going to move to I'm saying least restrictive of, blended to in-person, or we're increasing the amount of in-person days, but we would move from an in-person to blended or blended to remote if we saw things moving in the same direction. So I haven't committed myself to, I'm going to look at 4 weeks before I would make the move, because some things may be more immediate. But it wouldn't be, as we've talked before, we want to see trends, right? Like a 1-week blip is not a trend, it's just a 1-week blip. But if we start to see trend data that, okay, like we've seen over the last 6 to 8 weeks, things are steadily increasing in all of our measures. The outside measures of the county are being reflected by the inside measures of our school district. That's when I would take a look, if we started to see patterns and the patterns weren't at a level where it was cause for immediate concern, just something we had to watch.
One of the things that resonates with me about the plan is that it localizes what's going on within our school, and it allows us to be specific and pragmatic. So the idea, the extremes are always easy to understand what the decision is. If one person if one person or 2 students are quarantined in a classroom, it would make sense to be able to keep the students in class and those 2 students would be quarantined, and we now have tools to make that quarantine a little more effective. If, if 16 out of 20 are quarantined, well, then at that point, it makes sense to say, listen, for consistency, the teacher can do remote 2.0 for a 2-week period. We'll get through that quarantine, and then hopefully we'll be able to get everybody back in person. And to have the ability to do those kind of pinpoints, whether it's an individual classroom or a grade level or what have you, versus saying, this classroom has a large isolation or a large quarantine, we got to make the whole school go to remote. So I like the ability to do that. I think the information that we continue to learn, I'm going to cheat. Ms. Monzo mentioned Dr. Fauci, but I did see his interview, and he said, what we know today is much more information and more nuanced than what we knew 3 months ago, 6 months ago. And it resonated with me that he said, if my choice, we should work hard to keep schools open and we should close bars, because we have a better understanding of how the spread is occurring, where the spread is occurring, and it is not occurring the same way within schools. Another argument that resonates with me is, I think, as far as practice is concerned, the mask wearing, the washing the hands, the physical distancing, the being aware that our behaviors have an effect, I think are taught better and are understood better when students are in the classroom than it is when they're at home. The consequences of being out of school give me pause. I don't like to just pick on things, but the idea that suicide rate and depression and so on is going up, we do have to take that into consideration and respond to it. So I do think the proposal is reasonable, and I think it gives us a better ability to, again, educate our students, educate our children, and respond when their health and safety is at a serious risk. I support the idea of picking a date for when we go back to in-person. I think if the entire framework is one more week of remote, and then we go to the blended at the high school and the middle school for 2 weeks, and all in at the elementary level, and then on January 25th, we would bring everyone in person. I think that's effective. I think that is reasonable, and I think it gives everyone as much certainty as we can give in a very uncertain time. But I do think we have been doing it safely. We've been doing it pragmatically, and I think that's a safe and reasonable plan to balance having children in school and at the same time being safe and pragmatic. And like Cameron said, if something occurs between now and then that is a severe spike, a severe outlier, or whatever, we would have the ability to pause and reassess. But I think all the different audiences, teachers, administrators, parents, students, would like as much certainty as possible. So that's where I'm at, and I invite further discussion from my other board members.
Hey, Cameron, I guess my question, back to my question, if, like, we know Christmas is the 25th, so 10 days, I don't know, say around the 4th, wherever that is, and we are saying we're going remote, then, so if those numbers start ticking up, you would take that week to say, we're going to have to adjust and continue remote, or would you still stick with your blended?
Based on what we saw from Thanksgiving, we're expecting those numbers to be high or higher the week of January 4th.
Mm-hmm.
But we also expect, based not on my assumption, but what the data has shared in our district, that the week after, those numbers will go back to a normal level. Because during the week, the people that were exposed, based on whatever their activities were, they would exhibit symptoms prior to that. And I have to commend our staff and our students. They've done a phenomenal job of following the rules in terms of being extra cautious and staying home when they're having symptoms. So that would be the thought process of, we believe, based on what the data has told us from Thanksgiving, the large concern of the spike, people are going to know that they have COVID that week of January 4th. Then we would come back to school the week of January 11th. So what I am saying that's the plan.
Yeah.
That's the plan, because I can predict what the week of January 4th is going to look like. And then we're going to go back to the kind of, it's odd to say, but the normal level of COVID cases that we have, right? There's a predictable number that we've seen that we're going to have, but we're hopeful that, and we believe, I would not make that decision or recommendation if I didn't feel confident that it's in the best interest of the health and safety of everybody involved. And so, we believe that January 11th, there's always going to be a risk. We're in the middle of a pandemic. But that risk is going to be a typical risk that is going to be there with having school and having large groups of people together. But as Rich said, and as our data supports, we have not seen spread in the school district. If you take a look at our charts, we track that. And so since the start of the school year to now, we have 3 suspected cases of spread. They're not definitive. We don't know, but we said, hey, it's possible, so we're going to be transparent and put them on the chart. So we have what we're saying are 3 cases of suspected threat or spread. The other thing that, I think we have to look at is that our outside activities are having a significant influence on our school district. And so when we take a look, when did we have the highest level of COVID cases in our district? It was when we were in remote learning 2.0 this last time. So, again, I think we've mitigated those risks by saying, here's the time period we got to stay in remote. Here's the time period where people will be less apt to be with gatherings or be out. Get people back in. We haven't seen spread in our district, and our procedures and protocols have worked to mitigate as much risk as we possibly can. So then moving forward, Sherry, that's when I would take into consideration those spikes. When we get into January 11th, that's when I would take into consideration those spikes or those things that would happen that we would say, okay, we need to pause this group or this building, whatever it may be.
Okay, that's
Right.
kind of what I was getting at, like,
Yeah.
when would we make that decision?
Yeah.
So, also, I just want to make a point that one thing that Fauci says, that, those mitigating factors, the mask wearing, social distancing, and hand washing, but he also mentioned, and a lot of the directors of education mentioned testing, and we have no testing. Is there anything that came out of that, governor thing with nothing?
So there's nothing that came out of it. There's a local organization that's going around trying to get school districts to participate in a testing program. The challenge is, and this is not vetted by me, this is vetted by, area experts, is that there's pause from our Board of Health of doing things like that, especially for the validity of the validity and reliability of the tests. So that's one of the concerns that's out there to say, doing mass testing, it sometimes can give a false sense of security because of the results that are there. So there's been nothing that's been presented. What the governor shared, there's nothing that's come of that. There's other organizations that are looking at that, but through the recommendations of the organizations I'm a part of and the Board of Health, they're not saying, hey, this would be a great thing to go ahead and implement at this time.
I just say that to say, that would be for sure how we can determine, we would be able to say for sure there's nothing going on at the school, because we still don't know about asymptomatic spreaders or what have you. But, yeah, based on what you said, I agree. I like the plan, and I like the flexibility of the plan to be able to change in the middle of the game if we see spikes. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
I
don't have any questions, but I could support either of the options that Dr. Ryba laid out. I think they both accomplish the same goal, and I'm okay with whatever version that we want to go with.
I like the remote option for the first week back. I think the blended makes sense. One thing I would probably caution is maybe putting an exact date on it. But so I think it's a combination of that decrease of the data and the trends that we're seeing, along with trying to have like a potential date in mind, but again, reserving the right to obviously pivot if need be at that time. So I don't think it's necessary to stay in a in-person for pre-K to 5 and blended for 6 to 12 for the, kind of as it continues to go out. I think there is a time to try to get everybody back in school, but I definitely want to base it off of the trends that we're seeing in the data. And if that's the 25th, great. If it's the 1st or of February or whatever it may be, then I think that's fine. But
I don't want to speak for Cameron, but I think we might be saying the same thing, because the approach is that we are going to look at the data at the individual levels, and so we will have that flexibility to say, something's happening that we want to be cautious at the high school, something's happening at not just the elementaries, but this specific elementary, and even more direct, this classroom or this grade level at this elementary. And, if the information shows that it's widespread, we would act accordingly. But I do think it's important, if we follow the trends. I think January 25th is reasonable, and, I do think there's an understandable want or desire to have as much certainty as possible, and to be able to say that we expect to be able to do this on this date, barring data that would caution us otherwise at a specific level. I think that gives a good measure to parents so that they can plan as effectively as possible, knowing it's difficult to plan in a pandemic. To our teachers, so that they can start to have that framework that, this week I need to concentrate on remote entirely for my class. This week I need to concentrate for 2 weeks of blended, and I'm going to be ready to welcome everyone back, and also start to think about how do we, whatever that framework is, how do we effectively mitigate safety, et cetera, and how do we balance those kinds of things. We were very pragmatic with the blended, we were pragmatic with the remote 2.0. Kudos to Mrs. Pelko, kudos to Mr. Wingler, kudos to, I don't want to call her Nurse Tackleberry. Crystal, thank you. But we do need to recognize the amount of time we're putting in on contact tracing, the amount of time we're putting in on all of that administrative, and figure out ways so that when we make these changes, we have plans and procedures in place so that the load is lighter administratively, and there's different ways as a team we can work through that. So I think having a date is effective just from a planning standpoint, and knowing that, again, barring anything unforeseen, we're going to go forward. And I also think it's important because I think we want to, as safely as possible, have our kids back in school.
I know we have a meeting on the 7th. Is the next one the 21st?
21st,
Right, okay. So we have 2, okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Do you have any benchmarks, I guess, when you talk about your decision-making in terms of the absences, substitutes, prevalence of spread, like some ideas of the numbers you're looking at?
Yeah, so with the absences, we've used kind of a 20% benchmark. So, I break it down in terms of the absences of kind of 0 to 10% is a lower risk, 10 to 20, is a moderate, and anything above 20 gets above that moderate risk point. When we take a look at the spread, or not the spread, as positive cases, I use metrics that are looking at cases per 100,000, just like over a 2-week period. So I have that broken down into 3 categories, again, that look at kind of low risk, moderate risk, higher risk. So those are, benchmarks that we look at. I want to be clear that when I look at this, I'm looking at both internal and external factors. I'm just weighting them a little differently. I'm considering and weighting the external factors, but I'm giving more weight to the internal factors. Because the internal factors are just a reflection of the external environment out there. So, those are the things that I do have weighting scales for each of those things. We take a look at, busing levels. That's the thing we have to consider is how many students, what's the average ridership on a bus? What's the cohort movement on a bus? What's the percentage of the student population that's in isolation or quarantine? What's that rate per 100,000? So all of those factors, student staff absences, like we talked about, all of those factors are taken into consideration, and then you can kind of get a good picture of where the building is at.
Thank you. Seth, if I understood you correctly a minute ago, you were more in favor of kind of the until further notice approach out of Cameron's. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes, based on the trends.
Okay.
I think the 25th is fine to have as a ideal date in mind. I just don't want to be married to that in the sense that the data shows otherwise.
Okay. What I was going to ask was, and I think it maybe doesn't even matter, but does like moving the date further make the date more appealing, or
No.
it doesn't change anything?
That doesn't change it.
Okay.
So if I can paraphrase, we want to be able to, again, have as much certainty as possible, but we're not going, I don't think anyone on the board is committed to saying we're going to be slave to the date, the
Correct.
data be damned. Again, we all are of the same mind that if our students can be in school safely, that's where they should be. None of these decisions are easy or light, or else we wouldn't be discussing them at length. But I do think we have a reasonable plan, and unless there was any other discussion, I'd like to make a motion to move forward with that plan. Is there any other discussion? So hearing no other discussion, I'd like to make a motion that we adopt our plan, that the week
January 4th.
January 4th to January 7th will be a week of remote. Then the next 2 weeks will be a return to in-person for K through 5, 2 weeks of blended for the middle school and the high school, and then January 25th would be a return to in-person for all grade levels, barring data otherwise. That's my motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
I would just clarify, I don't know how George is writing it down, but
Don's taking the minutes.
so it's January 4th to January 8th. If you're just saying the week of January 4th, that's fine, but it's,
Yeah,
We're
I
off
mean,
one day.
we want the minutes to be accurate.
And
So January
pre-K, not K.
I'm sorry?
And also pre-K, not K.
Oh, gosh, I'm sorry, I forget the pre-K. So let's just, January 4th to January 8th. Let me pull the calendar up.
I do have another question too before we vote.
We'll have discussion. Let's get the motion clear. So, January 4th to January 8th would be remote. January 11th through the 22nd would be in-person for pre-K through 5, blended for the middle school and the high school. And January 25th would be in-person for all grade levels. And you had a question.
Yes, regarding the preschool, I recall reading somewhere that we were looking to keep them. Will they still be remote this first week as well? Like
Yes, so
January
they
4th?
will be remote for the first week as well. Part of our, Andy and his department has worked on remote learning plans. So even when we're in remote, we have students with disabilities that come in for their specially designed instruction. I did propose in the recommendation that right now we are implementing kind of an appointment schedule for providing those services. There's been some discussion about having our students with disabilities at the preschool follow their typical schedule. Yeah, and so that's one of the things I want to loop back with Megan to say, since it's just this 1 week, do you want to switch for that 1 week? Or do you want to stay with the appointment and then plan for if we ever go into remote again,
Okay.
what that would be, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Anagnostou?
Mr. Miko?
Yes.
Mrs. Hausum?
Yes.
Mrs. Bissell?
Yes.
Mrs. Soe?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
And the motion carries. So, at that point on our agenda, we are ready to move to board discussion, at which point we will stop the live streaming because we're going to go into retreat mode. Before we do that, I do want to take the time, regardless of what your beliefs are or what have you, I want to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah, a Merry Christmas, a happy Kwanzaa, a happy Boxing Day. Take the holiday time to remember what's important. And for us in the school district, what's important is family and our children, and recognizing that we're going to take a little bit of time to concentrate on that. And please, whatever decisions you make them wisely, how you spend those holidays. Individual decisions, I said this in an email, individual decisions that we make all add up to a outcome or a decision for our community. So whatever you do, please do it wisely, and please have a restful and a happy holidays. Thank you very much.